Chris,
Hey, Casey.
I haven't heard from, we are being recorded, but it's fine. I haven't heard from David yet as to whether he'll attend. I was able to connect just quickly with Reginald, just to get him up to speed. It sounds like he's got an unavoidable conflict this evening. He didn't have anything to add to the suggestion list or the itinerary that I guess we'll be building out tonight. So I guess we'll just wait a few minutes to see if David wants to join us. And if not, I have a little bit of a list that we can just quickly discuss. And yeah, we'll see if anybody else from the community joins in tonight.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I still haven't heard from David. So in terms of a run through of initial ideas, I don't know if you have, you know, thoughts that you've compiled. I have a few thoughts that are more, ministerial updates to share just initially, that I thought would be, some of them we've discussed, some of them were highlighted during the mayor's presentation to work group 3. I think it was 3 last week. So I thought it would be smart to start with some of those ministerial things. And then when our other working group members are able to join us, we can build, upon that and whatnot. So yeah, didn't know if you had any lists that you wanted to start with or not. And if not, I'm happy to dive in on some of the things that I've been looking at.
I'd like to hear your ideas and then I can go through some of what, oh, there's David.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, how are you all?
Hi, David. We're good. How are you?
Doing okay, doing okay.
Good. Well, you haven't missed much. We were just discussing a plan approach for this evening. I shared with Commissioner Grant that I've put together mostly a list of ministerial, modernizing updates. The mayor shared some of these during her presentation to work group 3, I think it was last week. And I pulled the ones that pertain to the chapters under our working group's purview, just to make sure there's, Workgroup 3 is getting the same information as we're getting. I think that these would have to originate with our working group if I'm understanding the process right, but maybe not. So, and then Chris said that he had some ideas as well. I don't know if you've got any that you've just prepared thoughts on or whatnot. So cool. Okay. Well, I was gonna say, we had sort of discussed me going first just with the list of pieces that have been shared with working group 1. If you're cool with that approach, I'm happy to dive in, and then we can sort of round robin, then go to you, Chris, and then maybe then over to you, David. Does that work?
Okay.
Okay. So the first one would be, it's in Article 8, Section 15. We've got two different sections, A and B, that provide that when the city is permitted by law to establish and maintain both a police department and an excise department. So this reflects the fact that we were under state control for both our police department and our excise department at this time. We are no longer under state control. We're not going back. So that's one of those modernizing things. Another one is in Article 8, Section 1, Article 13.
So sorry, could you say that first one more time?
Oh, the first site. Are you just looking for the article site for the first one, or?
Yes, but I also didn't quite, I was getting myself situated,
Oh, yeah.
If you could repeat it one more time, just so I could process.
Yeah, absolutely. Article 8, Section 15. This is in the Department of Public Safety language, and it has language in there that's a holdover from when two divisions in our city were under state control. One of those being the police department, and one of those being the Division of Excise. These are in sections A and B of their subsections A and B of Section 15. So we would remove the division of policy language in Section A, and I'll put this in writing, pertaining to the police department that says when we're permitted by law to have one, and then remove similar language for the Division of Excise in subsection B.
Okay.
Yeah, easy. The next one is Department of Humans. So we have the language that says Department of Welfare, which we haven't referred to it as that in a while. So update language throughout to more appropriately reference it as the modern entity that we call Department of Human Services. And that is found in Article 8, Section 1, Article 13, Section 1, and then Article 13, Section 14A.
Article 14, section what?
Article 13, Section 14-A.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm taking notes and maybe making like just
Yeah.
Google Sheets that just has all of them with the article references in them. I don't know if that would be helpful or just so
That's awesome.
we have like a place. Okay, go for it.
Another similar one is the Department of Health. So it currently says Department of Health and Hospitals. We don't manage hospitals anymore. So we would need to update it just to say Department of Health. And then we would also need to remove reference to the Division of Hospitals and the Board of Hospitals. So the relevant articles, get ready, are Article 8, Section 1, Article 8, Section 14 capital C, parentheses D. Article 8, Section 14 capital C, parentheses F through G. And Article 13, Section 1. And Article 13, Section 14-C.
And I think that was a space too where we were talking about perhaps wanting to see if that board of hospitals needs to be updated. You know, is that function still needed, but perhaps in a different sort of regulatory framework when it's not actually run by the city, but there's some kind of regulatory oversight that still could be useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see, other sort of modernizing thing is adding in the position, believe it or not, the position of corrections commissioner is not in the city charter, although we have had one for a long time. This should go, it's currently housed under the the Department of Public Safety, which is Article 8, and then Section 15 is the most likely space where we would add it. We're working with the Department of Public Safety to see if they can recommend some specific language. But just in general, adding that in. I think that we were a bit surprised to see that it wasn't included within
The
the
title one
article.
more time.
Sure, the Division of Corrections, and then we would need to add the specific position also. So it would say something to the effect of Division of Corrections, the head of said division shall be known as the Corrections Commissioner. And that mirrors the other relevant, divisions within DPS, say the division of this, and the division shall be known as this. Another piece that I think that we talked about one of our early meetings going through the articles, Article 15, Section 30, pertaining to public printing and publishing requirements. The charter currently provides all public notice and publishing by the city must be done in 2 daily newspapers, one of which is in German and one of which is in English. We don't currently have to, and we certainly don't have a German one. So recommendation is to modernize, to provide generally that public publishing may be done via a variety of means, including, but not, limited to the city's website or, online or, a newspaper, I think would be an easy encompassing way to approach that. And online or in print, if we wanted to really cover all the bases and give flexibility. And then the final one on my list for tonight was updating procurement processes. I know we very generally talked about this early on. I know this is something the mayor presented to Workgroup 3, and they were very interested in it. So right now in Article 25, Section 29, that's the Comptroller or Division of Finances article. There's the following requirements for purchases up to $5,000. You have to have a comptroller's written approval. They have to secure a competitive bid. And we have so many examples in recent history. One that's jumping to my mind was during the flood 2 summers ago, where that $5,000 lid really hampered the city's responsibility. It continues to limit our ability to purchase simple items in bulk, like office chairs, things like that. We spend too much time as a city getting approval for small dollar items. So the recommendation being to either consider increasing that limit up to a $10,000 threshold trigger, I think was the amount, or if there's, a different amount we want to consider. But the recommendation was to just bump that up to $10,000 so that the city has a little bit more flexibility. And I think that's it on my list for tonight.
What article was that?
Oh, sure. Article 25, Section 29.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. David, do you mind if I jump in, or do you want to go first, or go next?
Go for it.
So, my thoughts aren't as organized in the sense of like I've have particular articles and provisions, but rather concepts. And I have not really thought about the Board of Public Service yet because we haven't heard from them directly. So I'd like to hear from them before I formulate any ideas. The moment I'm not, other than the ministerial or housekeeping items that you mentioned, I doesn't seem to me there's a problem with BPS, but I'm happy to, that maybe just because I don't know. I think the two major issues that I am thinking of, which I've heard from a number of people, are giving budgeting authority or the ability to increase items in the proposed budget to the Board of Alder people. And that would be a very easy, as far as drafting, very easy change in by just adopting, but modifying one or two lines in the existing article on the Board of B and A. Or E and A. I think the other concept, which is much more complicated, but I hear from a number of people, is do we need to either eliminate or modify the Board of E and A because it is a kind of an arcane body that that not many other cities use, and or do we need to modify and in some way modernize and reduce the authority of the comptroller? Because that's a position which many cities have, but for which they don't vest the same level of essentially policy-making authority that the city of St. Louis gives its comptroller by reserving a seat to that person on the Board of E and A. So, and I'm not, I haven't really fully formulated opinions one way or the other. Other than I do think I am very interested in giving budgeting authority to the Board of Alder people. I think the current system, I'm not convinced that the purpose of the current system, which is to essentially prevent the Board of Alder people to appropriate or to increase items, is going to threaten the city's credit or result in deficit spending. I mean, these people are elected representatives. They're answerable to their constituents directly. They have, I think they should have the authority to be able to budget items above what is proposed. You know, the comptroller's role and authority, I have not fully formed an opinion on that, but I think that's obviously something we've already heard from the League of Women Voters on in their report. And I just not sure of the that the benefits of her sitting on the Board of E and A, or her position, outweigh the detriments of essentially slowing the process for contracts getting signed, executed, and expenditures getting made. But I don't know. I haven't fully developed thoughts on that yet.
Chris, on the BOA budgeting, are you thinking also about safeguards?
Say that. I'm sorry, Casey. What was your question?
On the Board of Aldermen budgeting piece, are you also thinking about safeguard components?
Safeguards, you mean like
Like
budgeting?
court spending, directing money to people's districts instead of like to the whole city as it's currently appropriated? Like, what are you thinking of along those lines?
Well, I mean, you mean this to ensure that I mean, first of all, any budget would have to get, the safeguard would be any budget still has to get signed by the mayor, right? You know, it's an ordinance. So and if it doesn't passes, there needs to be a veto override. So I'm not sure what other safeguard, what are you thinking? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding the question.
No, I just think that anything that guards against, I mean, we've had 3 alders go to jail recently, and I think we have a different crop there now entirely than those 3 individuals who made some very poor choices. And, I mean, even the state prohibits, direct appropriations to cities. There are people who try to get around that, of course, in different ways. But just as a, best practice, I think, like the system that we have or not, it doesn't benefit one district over another, one ward over another, I guess I should say, districts at state level. So just thinking through, I was just curious if you thought about that at all, you know, the potential for that to happen, if you thought it would be prudent for there to be any safeguards built in to try to guard against that, or, you know, anti-corruption provisions or things like that.
I think the anti-corruption idea is really great. I guess I don't know if our current system necessarily has those safeguards that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the way that, especially when the Board of Aldermen was 28, the allocation of funds, the use of different incentives, you know, that were all also often aldermanic privilege to access. You know, those weren't like line items for certain alders in the budget, but effectively could be used that way and how they were allocated later. So I totally I agree with you on like that being a really important piece of the system. I guess I don't know if the way that it happens in St. Louis is necessarily fully guarded against in our current system too. And uh, to what you were saying earlier, Chris, like I also don't feel a way either way yet. Like, but I think it's something that we should look into because it's been raised by a number of community groups just about that role in that process. Um, in some other cities, that role still exists, but it acts more like a watchdog and an auditor and a like fidelity to financial principles. It just doesn't have that policy making function. So
Yeah,
that
that's a good point, because that actually goes to the safeguards issue. You know, to what extent is money being monitored as it comes in and goes out, but especially goes out. But I can't tell, to what extent does the comptroller already have pretty comprehensive auditing powers?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
um, you know, I mean, can the comptroller right now, like I think of like the state auditor who performs this, I think pretty important function, you know, of being able to go to political subdivisions and say, I'm doing a review of your finances, and then can um identify issues with you know, like lack of proper safeguards, you know, on spending, like checks aren't getting signed by two people, or there's not a review of, you know, this contract, or there's, you know, not monitoring of these accounts. I don't know if does a comptroller do that sort of stuff or already have that power, or does the comptroller need that power? That's
I just have to list, I just searched Comptroller City of St. Louis audit. So that pulled up their a web page that seems to go into a little bit of detail about their internal audit section that focuses its efforts on areas with the greatest risks and makes recommendations for improvements to the efficiency and effectiveness of operations and the adequacy of internal controls over financial information, the safeguarding of assets and compliance with laws and regulations. They talk about where they receive their authority. It's in Article 25, Section 2 of the city charter, and there's certain parts of our city code. And then they have an audit database along with an archive of the audits on that webpage as well, if that's helpful.
well, so I think I then maybe that exists already, and maybe it's just not getting exercised.
I mean,
Well,
it looks like it. I mean,
I do hear the distinction. Like, for example, like in some of my previous advocacy work, it was more a reliance on the state auditor role. Like when Nicole Galloway was in it, she did a investigation around use of like police slush funds, you know, around use of um, dollars that were taken from people that were arrested, or you know, other efforts like that. It's my understanding too that those kinds of approach to like being a watchdog versus compliance is more of what that state role. But thanks for sharing that website. That's super helpful to see that they do those kind of like compliance audits.
I guess going back to your point about the budgeting authority, Casey, I just so right now, the charter says the Board of Aldermen may reduce the amount of any item in the appropriating proposed ordinance, except amounts fixed by statute, or the payment of principal or interest of city debt, but it may not increase such amount. I'm just not sure that we lose a safeguard by at changing the line, and it may also increase the amounts. I mean, that number one is an ordinance that's got to get everybody's, a majority in the board, and then it's got to get over a veto from the mayor. And it's pretty much the authority that almost every other city has, right? So, and I feel like it's right now the system's a bit undemocratic. I mean, I know the comptroller is elected citywide, the mayor is elected citywide, the president of the board of alder people is elected citywide, although that's a bit archaic anyway. But you have the actual alder people who are like the most connected to the constituents in their wards, who are, I mean, I pretty much removed from the process, at least legally. I mean, I understand there's a lot of negotiation behind the scenes, right? But at least legally, they don't have the authority to increase the items. I'd almost rather like bring that process, right, which is happening maybe behind the scenes right now, into the light and say, like, look, if my alderperson wants to increase this budget item, make an amendment on a proposed bill, and have them justify that in public.
For me, I think that's the way I lean too, especially if ENA was to stay the same. There's still a rigorous process there, like Chris was saying, in which, it's not like they can unilaterally add. It would still have to be approved.
I guess, I mean, those are my thoughts. So it was, I don't know, David, I'd like to hear what your ideas are.
Sure. Um, so we found that the fiscal year needed updating. I believe that was in the section relating to the comptroller. So that was something smaller that just needed to be updated to our actual fiscal year. I also had the relationship of ENA and the budgeting process with the Board of Alders and the Budget Authority to increase line items in the budget process, as well as thinking about the policymaking power of the comptroller's office versus a kind of financial responsibility role in the process, sort of as something to look into more and understand. The comptroller's office said that they were going to send over a set of examples, from other cities too, of why, this current setup is the best way. And so I'd love for us to just think about it more and compare it with some of the ways that other cities function, and some of what the model charter talks about, because I'm pretty sure they do have some sections that are specifically about like fiduciary responsibility and financial responsibility in processes and how different cities set up those configurations. So it'd be great to dig into that more. In the Board of Public Service, and just the listing of departments, I did want to lift up the recommendation that we received from community members around creating a Department of Transportation, which was something that I had been thinking about too previously as well. Sorry, you might be able to hear my dog getting upset. But wait, give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
And so the Department of Transportation would essentially amalgamate some various types of departments, like streets and
That
parks
was
or,
my reading of I believe it was the Community Mobility Committee that put that report together. I could be incorrect about who produced it, but I believe that was what that report was advocating for was instead of an addition on top of existing structure, a smushing of things that currently exist into a new structure.
We're talking about Department of Transportation. So
Yes.
yeah, an argument that some of the way that different city services that are related to transportation are kind of weirdly separated in our current system, which means that they often have to collaborate around these particular issues, but because we don't have any kind of organizing entity like they do in some other cities, that means we lose out a lot on big opportunities in this space structurally.
David, do you remember, was it the Community Mobility Committee that produced that report? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really interests me because I know that the mayor's office has staff that focus on transportation as a policy issue. Um, but there's no departmental lead in the city for that might coordinate with like by state or with state entities. You know, it's kind of more diffuse. And I do think that's a way that we um, just have less planning capacity and coordination capacity. It makes me think a lot about the vacancy committee or the vacancy commission that's done a lot of work across the last few years, last 5 years or so. And they, in that same way of like land use around vacancy, have had to work with departments to create all sorts of communication across the agencies that you think they would be doing already. But because there's no organizing framework around it, you know, it's forestry and then it's streets, and then part of it is under the Department of Public Safety, part of it's not, you know, and so it's these really diverse set. And so I think this is a similar situation from what I've seen from my work, heard from advocates. Um, Something else that's in some other cities that is really powerful and also is in the model charter for the municipal league. Talks about a division of public engagement, especially thinking about like democracy reforms that can happen in local governments to encourage more public engagement, and also to think about public engagement as like a core function of what government does, and to have a professionalized resource within the government that can support um, engagement of residents. Um, I've seen it be really powerful in some other cities and do some really impactful work. And then was also that, like I said, the recommendation in the model charter around it. So would love if we could explore what that means and how that's set up in some other cities, because I think it can be really impactful for like public transparency, public access, and doing it in a way that's one step above the normal way that we do commissions and engagement in the city of St. Louis, which isn't always great.
was there, David, was that in the model charter or was that in like okay, I have to look at that, so.
It's in the model charter, and then I don't have the list in front of me of the cities that have one, but I can produce it because I looked at a couple. The one other thing that we had discussed before in our first meeting, I believe, was we didn't see anything about emergency services in there, which makes sense. I think our like current 911 system wasn't even created really until the 1950s, is like where the origins of the 911 system. So that would have been what, 70 years after the last time the charter was updated. So I remember us noting that as maybe missing from the designations of divisions in the charter. Those were some of the initial things that I was thinking about.
David, on the division of public engagement idea, were you thinking of that being housed under an existing city entity, being a standalone thing. Haven't gotten that far yet.
There are a couple, I think cities do it differently, but I don't have like a recommendation that I've thought through yet. Some have it as an agency that's under the mayor's office and then serves a role, you know, across supporting across the government, or at least across the executive branch of the government. Some of them have divisions that are in some other cities, they have I'm forgetting what they're called, but essentially um, a department that houses community engagement more broadly, like including oversight boards in some cities. So it's like a department that has an oversight function for the city, and then they'll have like a division around community public engagement underneath that. So those are two of the structures that I've seen.
Okay.
Well, some cities or counties, and I think this might include Jackson County or the city of Kansas City, have like an ethics
Mm.
commission, which is maybe part of that public access or engagement function, but I think is also responsible for ensuring, you know, protecting conflicts of interest, or ensuring disclosures of potential conflicts that you know, which you know is supposed to be happening under in some respect already, but I don't think there's a very good enforcement mechanism, you know, under the charter amendment that was that was passed a couple years ago. But I don't know, is that something that you're thinking of, David, or and how?
I mean, yes, I think it's pretty radically different than how we're set up now, which isn't a reason not to consider it. But it is, I've been excited by other cities that do have some of that like oversight and ethics and public engagement kind of grouped together as a core function of government. I think there are even some cities where their equivalent of a comptroller is part of that, and it's in that kind of more like watchdog engagement ethics of the government kind of role that includes finances but also other things. But that's just one model.
So I have a process question then. So we will meet. What did we decide on the February
We have
15th?
we have two more meetings, one more next Thursday, which is
Yes.
with the BPS director, and then one more in February. Is it the 15th?
Yes, February the 15th is our working group's next scheduled meeting.
And then we need to present drafts of proposals on the 19th, right? February 19th. What do you envision, Casey and David, is what our process is for developing drafts and presenting them as far as like this? For instance, do we need to come up with a consensus? Do we all have to agree on something? If just one person wants to present something, do we present it? Like, what are you?
So
Yeah,
our
I
rules,
honestly, I don't think as a work group, we really have the ability. I don't know, like I was, you know, we don't really operate as a subcommittee with like authority to say yes or no. I don't think that was what the work groups were set up to do, but you know, on the other hand, I don't want to present something as like, this is something that, you'd like to present something that says everybody in the work group thinks this is a good idea, right? So I don't know. What do you envision as that process?
well, so I think to some extent, right, we are, and well, not to some extent, we are just flat out governed by our rules of order and procedure that we adapted. So we have to take those into account. You know, there's reading through that, you know, anyone is able to on the commission able to present um, a amendment. I mean, looking specifically at the framework for voting in general for the whole committee, that could guide our process. Anyone can submit a change, but only voting members can vote upon it, is that framework, which has been my understanding. So it would be yourself, Commissioner Grant, you, Commissioner Dwight, and then Commissioner Garth as well would be the three people who get to vote. But anyone could put those forward. I think this is something where I would like to, have Commissioner Grant's buy into whatever, process we discuss. I wish he was able to participate tonight for that reason. And perhaps, even after the, if we wanted to have another, ministerial meeting between the 25th and then, the 15th, we could, if we want to go over process. But, if it's the preference of this group that all three of you have to be in lockstep for, unanimous voice, I don't think that's a bad message, to send to the full commission of, hey, like we were all in unison on this. I don't get a say in that, so I don't really want to speak for Commissioner Grant.
I appreciate that grounding in what our rules of order are. I mean, me personally, like when it comes to like what our work group is presenting, I don't mind you having a voice in that because it's not like necessarily an official vote of the commission. So to me, I don't know that it has to be unanimous for what we give. We can discuss whether it should be or not, but I don't think the rules preclude us deciding on a process that includes all members, all working group members. It's just the full commission. You can do voting.
I would agree with that. I think that's consistent with the rules. And I would also note that, like, even if there's something that doesn't, let's say, if somebody puts forward a amendment that does not get a majority vote, for example, that commissioner is still able to bring that forward to the full charter commission. There's nothing that binds it to this process. So, that's also something to be thinking about.
And we could have a list of what we considered if we want to. I don't know, that could open a can of worms with something for us to think about.
Yeah, or we could certainly develop, like here are the ideas for which the work group has a unanimous opinion of we're in favor of this. And then like go through those, and then like certain individuals of the work group might have their own proposals, and we'll present those separately at a different time or something like that. I do think there is some benefit of saying like the work group as a whole has listened to all of this testimony from people, and like we think this is a really good idea. I certainly when other work groups present, and if they said everyone on their work group thought this was a really good idea, that would mean something to me, right?
Yeah. So maybe a process could be, presenting anything that does move forward from this working group. And then, there could be hey, these are the ones that, all these were ultimately voted out. These are ones that had unanimous consent. These are ones that maybe, one person felt differently about. And, that would create some space for that person, to share their thoughts about, why they felt differently with the group for the benefit of the whole group. So that could be something to consider as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, not to be negative, but I do think we've really missed out as a commission to like give direction to work groups for how we should be prioritizing recommendations, or to create any kind of schema of like what issues we most see in the charter that we want to value or prioritize, or like what rubric we're going to grade them on exactly when we then come together. Because I don't know, I see the chance for more chaos in how we actually sift through these recommendations, because we haven't come to any agreement on like what we value most as a group, or what our vision is.
Yeah.
So I admit I'm I do think we've been remiss as a commission in setting any of those things, and I worry about
Mhm.
what it's going to be like to consider them together.
That is true. I mean, that's starting to get into, I think it's going to be very difficult to actually, when people start putting pen to paper, drafting something, thinking about, we need 6 votes, and is this a good idea to even present to the public? That's going to be very, very hard. I mean, you just imagine the difficulty in the legislative process when drafting something and how many permutations a bill will go through. It's going to be very hard on an accelerated timetable to like go through these drafts, make sure we're not doing something with really bad unintended consequences, and um, you know, be able to to get 6 people to like agree to that. I think it's going to be a difficult process. I mean, we're talking like major issues that people have brought up, like city managers, right? Or which we haven't really thought of, but other groups are, that's, you're talking about a complete, uh, uh, just the logistics of a proposal like that requires a substantial rewrite of the charter, let alone like thinking about the policy implications of like, is this good for democratic participation, you know? So
Yeah.
that will be
One
very
thing,
hard.
yeah, one thing I think that we can be thinking about, and we certainly don't have to make any decisions tonight on it, is whether for whatever recommendations come out of this working group, if we want, you know, those to be, sort of individual, or if there's, if there is, if it does occur that there's a way to like package something, like one thing that occurs to me would be, that could easily be packaged would be updating the Department of, welfare, and the Department of, health and hospitals, like those like small things like could be packaged together if that's what we wanted. But just I think something for us to just be thinking about too, in terms of, as we look forward to doing this, what seems to make the most sense in terms of presenting those to the full commission, whether, batching to some degree, or I could also see an argument for, individual standalone things for people to consider too. So again, nothing we have to really decide tonight, but something to be thinking about. Okay.
All
Well,
right.
yeah, we have one person, member of the public, who is here, Mr. Bryson from TrailNet. Mr. Bryson, would you raise your hand if you wanted to make a comment? If so, I'm happy to move you over. Okay, I'm not seeing a hand. Okay. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for putting pen to paper and keeping track of the lists for us. I think that we've got a good list going so far, a healthy list, and a lot to be thinking about. And yeah, I will also see if we can connect, if I can connect with uh, Commissioner Garth too, just to let him know what the conversation was tonight, and maybe ask him to be in touch with you all as well to start sharing some of his thoughts. In the meantime, since we have BPS next week, are there any questions that you want me to make sure, other than our standard questions that, that what would you change? What would you add? What's your modern role? Things like that. And if you don't have them tonight, that's fine. But if there's anything that you want to make sure that BPS, comes prepared to talk about, I'd say just let me know now or shoot me an email, and I'll make sure that Director Bradley gets that.
My only question goes to something I think we talked about at our first work group session when we went through the article on the Board of Public Service, which is there, I think we identified like uh, the necessity, the benefits of cooperation and coordination
Mm,
between all the various divisions and departments in BPS. Is
Mhm.
there some impediment in the charter right now to that happening, right? You know, and or what improvement,
Mhm.
what improvements could be made in the charter to facilitate cooperation between the departments? I mean, is that just a language thing, or is that like, does someone need to be vested with more authority? I'd be interested in hearing about that. So,
Sure. Oh, David, you're on mute.
Thanks. I like that because it could also be like removing barriers, but it could also be, are there any like is there enabling language that could support, I don't know, that opportunity, like you said. I think that's great.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Yeah. And if anything else occurs in the meantime, just give me a holler, shoot me an email. Otherwise, he is looking forward to joining us at 5:30 next Thursday. It won't be your usual 6 o'clock time. It's going to be 5:30. I don't think that the Charter Commission staff had noticed that up as of 5 p.m. tonight. So I'm going to circle back with them tomorrow just to make sure they get it on the public agenda, because I know that there were a lot of people who were interested in that department. So we'll make sure that gets noticed up here soon. And otherwise, thanks, guys.
okay, thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Be safe.